This is the Stages of the Soul podcast, a production of the Caritas Center. I'm Brian Dolan, and with me, the lovely Nancy Kane.
Good to be with you.
And today we're going to be discussing various topics around the idea of preparing you for the holidays.
You, the collective you.
The collective you, yeah, because I'm going to need some of this. Nancy's going to need some of this. We know you listening are going to need some of this. And for the hyper-spiritual listening, yes, I said holidays. I know some people get offended by that, Nancy. Are you aware of that?
You know, I would suspect that some might, but we live in a world that holiday means a lot of things to a lot of people now. So I think we have to adjust.
Yeah, I'm going to adjust. Thanksgiving's behind us, but we still have Christmas and New Year's. Holiday, plural, holidays. So, but Merry Christmas early. We're like 4 weeks away from that right now. And a lot of people are already recovering sort of from Thanksgiving, right? Mm-hmm. And getting together with family is something many people look forward to, some don't. Regardless, dysfunction typically happens, I would say, with most people, if not all. Mm-hmm. And now we just get a couple of weeks to hit pause and then do it all over again at Christmas time. Mm-hmm. I can imagine when you were a practicing therapist, your office would just fill up this time of year. Is that fair?
I wouldn't say it'd fill up, but there would be a steady flow of content from clients around, how am I going to handle it? Because my, brother's coming in from out of town, or my, my uncle that I don't get along with is showing up for the meal, or we're doing gift exchange, but I don't, just all kinds of intricacies related to the family dynamic that people would be kind of taking a deep breath and saying, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to handle it. And I think
most of us are there.
What's that?
I think most of us are there, right? Where in fact, how about this? Did you ever have somebody come to a therapy session and go, by the way, let's just talk about something else because I'm good. My family's coming to town and we're fine.
Yeah, I can't say I ever heard that. It would be great. And I'm sure there's people out there like that. But I think there's something about, it's not just family dysfunction. I think we live in a culture that puts so much expectation that there's going to be this magical moment in time that everybody's going to come together and take a deep sigh and give each other a hug and say, it's just wonderful to be together. It's a Wonderful Life kind of thing,
yeah.
Or White Christmas, name your movie. That suddenly the room's just going to be filled with hearts and flowers and love and kindness. But more often than not, we bring into those times our history, our perceptions of each other, our projections, and it colors our experience.
Yeah, there's so many cultural depictions of the perfect Christmas, right? There's an entire channel now, the Hallmark Channel, which I can't stand those movies, but my wife loves all the Christmas Hallmark movies. Do you like them?
I do like them. I think that they're
what?
For Ray and I, they're kind of because life can be so heavy. So when we watch those, it's like, what's going to happen. There'll be a little bit of setback with somebody that they won't necessarily get together at some point, and then they get together at the end. But there's all this beautiful Christmas stuff.
I'm so surprised you like that. Are you ever surprised by the ending?
Never, no. I mean, that's why I say it's not. It's not brain science. It's not. It's not deep at all. But most of our life is working in the deep part of the pool with people in terms of their trauma and their wounds, and and we love it. But it's also nice to have a little bit of a other spectrum of the worst thing in a Hallmark movie is someone missed their cab on the way to the airport. They're supposed to meet the love of their life and it didn't work, and I mean that's about as heavy as it gets.
And now, are there a significant number of people that would watch that and wish that their family would be like that?
I don't know. I wonder if it's more of that Hallmark paints it as slip into this other world for a moment, where everybody loves everybody, and if there is some tension, it's only momentary because it's for, the larger good of the person. Or I think that's their purpose, is to kind of provide an escape.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were mentioning to me even a Folgers commercial that you
Yeah,
thought was another idealized family thing.
yeah. I don't know if they run them anymore. I want to say it was on. They was running maybe last year, but when they set it up where it's Folgers and you're in a kitchen, and then it looks like the fellow who came out of the service, who was home on leave, walks into the kitchen. It's, early morning. And then his mother comes down. She hears some clatter, but the coffee's running, and she embraces her son. And then they sit down over Folgers and have this wonderful cup of coffee. And you can tell they're like reminiscing and catching up, and everything's warm and wonderful, as if like there's just no pain. There's no
Yeah.
like heartache or trauma from war, or and there's a few Folgers commercials like that where it paints this really, there's a family out there that perfectly love each other, and there's no pain or setback or trauma or misunderstandings. Or And I think it's great to have the ideal, but I think it also can then set up for ourselves this sense that why isn't my family like that? They should be.
And see, if you go to a church on any Sunday morning or any holiday, you'd presume, looking around and talking to everybody, that everything's great. These are where the functional families are. Everyone's happy. You get, how you doing? Oh, I'm blessed and highly favored, better than I deserve, Brian. They might have been screaming at each other in the car, but you don't know because no one says anything. And so I think a lot of Christians get disillusioned, and a lot of people outside the church watch this and go, "Are these people for real?" And yet you're telling me that you have yet to find in any of your professional work a family that is functional to a point of not having any trauma or dysfunction.
No, well, I think I met one student who, in the 25 years I was there, I met one student whose father had passed away prior to her coming to Moody. And from everything I knew about her and about how she functioned, her family and her parents and her siblings, I felt like that's probably the closest I've seen to a healthy family. But they did have the trauma of losing their dad. And but it brought them closer together. But the communication they had, and like I said, watching the student, seeing how healthy she was emotionally, so I think it's possible, and I don't think we should be doom and gloom. Not that we are, but I think it's possible. It just means that particularly the parents have to do the work. What's interesting is that you would think that there'd be an ideal in Scripture, but we see the opposite. You see the family trees of constant sin and dysfunction, trauma, David's line. I mean, the level of darkness in terms of some of the things that went on with his children and the extended family. So, what does that tell us about how we're setting our sights for the ideal? It tells us that we need a redeemer.
Yeah, and just to lay it out there, we have to be careful, since both of us have family that may or may not listen to this. So I'll be as generic as possible, but just to share some dysfunction so people don't feel alone. I can remember we have one relative, my wife and I, that loves to swear all the time, particularly in front of children. And so one time this person was asked to not swear in front of the kids at the birthday party. And that person had driven like 3 hours for the party. They marched off, got back in the car, and drove 3 hours home. Skipped the whole party because they were asked not to swear. And so my wife and I had to decide at some point, are we willing to put up with this? Because if we're willing to put up with this person swearing around the kids all the time, we'll see them. And they are of value to the family. And so at the end of the day, we accepted that this person is going to look at me, smile, and swear just to see if they get a rise out of me. And then over time, they just kind of stopped doing it. But the swearing relative.
Well, because they didn't get the reaction. As well as I think that isn't that more wisdom about life, is that we have to deal with each other's shortcomings.
Yes.
Ours is not to walk around being correcting everybody so that we can be comfortable. It's actually accepting what we've got and making the best of it.
Well, and that's where one of the bigger trends, because I did as you know, you were on it. I did a podcast series called The Grandfather Effect, where I did a bunch of family research and looked at some broken relationships in my family. It
Really well
turns
done,
out,
by the way. Really well
oh,
done.
thank you. The best part was the episode you were on.
Oh, right.
So I thought so. It's becoming increasingly common for people to disown their relatives. When you look at millennials and Gen Z, their solution to family dysfunction is they wouldn't call it disownment because that sounds so big, just cutting people off. Oh, you can't adjust to what my needs are. I'm cutting you off. No contact, no discussion. I mean, on my morning radio show, we had a time where we had a famous psychologist come on the show, willing to take questions about family relationships. And we were flooded with parents of adult children that had been cut off. So, under what circumstance do you think somebody ought to totally cut someone out of their life? No contact.
I think that when it borders on abuse or enablement, you know,
And when you say abuse, what do you mean by abuse? Because that's become a really wide term too.
yeah, I think that when a person's being dishonored and it's blatant and there's no hope for, redemption or that person changing their ways. But I think that, and you're right, I think that we live in a world that uses that term lightly, where abuse, some people define abuse as like, that person said something to me that I don't like, so that's abusive.
Right.
Well, no.
Right.
It's where the person is intentionally wanting to create harm and do evil or darkness towards a person to dishonor them. So you see, I'm defining that much more in a severe, there's an intentionality, there's a conscious effort, and the intention is to do harm. So what that means then, there's a lot of interactions that we have with other people where someone says something rude or they're just an out of touch person and they say things that just are insensitive. That's not abusive. That's clueless. That's, that's, they just are unaware. But abuse is where again, it's seeking to do harm. There's intentionality to dishonor the person. So I think that is where you have to think twice about engaging in a family dynamic and enabling also. If someone's showing up to a family function constantly drunk and expecting everybody to be okay with that, that's not okay, because you're basically saying we're going to turn a blind eye to something that is harmful to you and ultimately to other people. But I think that with what we're talking about is, I think often we miss the opportunity to learn in our families how to love well and how to forgive.
Is that your doorbell or is that a clock?
That's our clock. That's our 125-year-old clock.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's
Wow.
it doesn't ring. It doesn't ring on the right. The bells don't ring at the right time. But if I was 125 years old,
It's got some dementia, the clock. Not
so
sure what
like
time it is.
it's ringing. It should be ringing at 2, and it just rang about 4 or 5 bells.
Well, but it's fitting. Are you going to go throw out the clock? No, you're not. You're not going to take a bat and destroy the clock because it's
Right,
ringing incorrectly.
I'm going to accept the clock for being 125 years old.
The perfect illustration. And the clock even interrupted, which some people get upset about, right? But anyway, thank you, clock, for helping us with this. But I mean, based on your definition, by the way, of what abuse is, it would seem to me that that would be the outlier and the exception. But the vast majority of people listening right now who have a relative that makes them want to cut them off, that person's probably not abusive.
No, and I think that this is where what we have in families that makes the functioning so complicated is we have history. So some people come to the holidays with the history of when I was, when I was in grade school, my parents got divorced or my parents separated, and I'm still remembering the pain of that, and I'm still feel angry about that. And then bringing that into the conversation or bringing that backdrop into the relating at the holidays and not necessarily being aware that how that's bleeding into the conversations.
Yeah, and I feel badly when I hear about people who have their relationships so cut off. I mean, the parents of adult children that I've heard from are just devastated by these relationships. And I think the challenge becomes, how does one cope in the midst of, let's just say, an annoying aging mother or father? Like, let's just say the person listening shows up every year to Christmas. It's like they're time warped back to being 12 again, and their mother's treating them like they're 12. It'd be easier just to cut off mom. But how do you function in that environment without going crazy?
Well, and I think this is where your personal work comes in, is that I think if you let your reactions be defined by a dysfunctional parent or dysfunctional sibling or family member, you're at the whatever at the like the I can't think of the right word, but whatever they say, you're at the mercy of their comments. Well, no, you're not. Um, we all have choices. We all have to make choices for health and our own self-reflection. So, say Aunt Marge always comes in and says something rude about somebody's weight. Like I had a relative years ago who had an uncanny ability. We could be having just a super pleasant conversation. Then in the midst of that, she would say something to the effect of, "Looks like you colored your hair. I just don't think that works for you."
She'd say it out loud.
Yes.
That's
And then
so
she would
rude,
continue
Nancy.
on, and then she would continue on as if, like, that's okay.
Okay, so I'm laughing because it didn't happen to me, but let's just say that someone's listening to this, they're not laughing, and they're saying, this happens to me. A relative literally insults my weight, my hair color, my glasses, my clothes. How can I not be hurt by that? It's hurtful.
Well, and what I found, because like this relative, it wouldn't be just hair color. It would be like that lipstick doesn't look good on you, but it would be on the fly, which was always so taking
It's
off guard.
disorienting.
Yeah, because we'd be having like dinner or something, and then she'd say something like I said, like it's a pretty sweater, but it's just not your style. You know? And initially, when they first got married, initially I would be offended. Well, first I'd be shocked because it was always like on the fly,
Yeah.
like like walking through the room, making the comment, then walking out the room. So there's no space to even respond. And then as it happened over and over in the years, I began to see like the bigger dimension of this is her. Like this is she doesn't have in her the capacity to know that she's being offensive. Nor is it my job to make her into the person I want her to be.
Because she probably won't be able to change. Am I correct?
Yes, right.
And she's probably not interested in changing. And you're also saying, like, the things she was saying are very insulting and rude, but not abusive.
Right. More,
Why is it
more
not abusive?
because she wasn't seeking to do harm. She was just expressing an opinion, but being clueless about it. And I
Yeah.
mean, it got to the point where over the years, Ray and I would just laugh after because it wasn't just me. It was like random shootings in the family. Like she would say something to someone else, and then again smile and just like move on. Like she just like it was really okay. And that's why I think it was more clueless and unaware. And I at one point I had to decide, am I going to say something or not? And I thought, no, this is a larger issue. I'm not just the only person she says rude things to. So I don't think that I've been called to be the person who's going to course correct and change her life. Um, my job is, what does it look like to show love and respect here? And so one of the things I learned to do over time is, rather than getting into situations where there was a pause in the conversation, where she could then, do a drive-by shooting kind of thing, I would keep the conversation short, and I keep them focused on her. And then when I knew I was getting to my capacity where I couldn't do it anymore, I would plan a timeout. I'd go do errands. I'd say, "Oh, I'll go get the rolls. That's okay. I don't mind driving." And it would give me the half an hour or the hour to kind of recoup and then come back in.
But now somebody listening believes, like it's their job to call out the injustice. You know what I mean? Like some people have this just compulsion that I've got to tell Aunt Marge she needs to stop this. She's hurting people. It's got to stop. And I'm the one to do it.
Yeah, I don't think, read 1 Corinthians 13. I find myself going back to it over and over again lately, and I see nothing in that passage of scripture that says, call out people in their nastiness. It says, love bears all things, hopes all things, believes all things, love never fails. And, as you know, with that passage, Paul was really dressing down the Corinthians for their arrogance and their duplicity in their lifestyle, and saying, you think that you're all that in a bag of chips. You're not. You're not.
Yeah. Yeah. And, my wife had somebody in her life where she handled this in a similar way, where she did such a good job. There's somebody in her life who just liked to talk junk about people. Their favorite thing to do was gossip. And so this person would look at my wife and go, "Oh, did you hear so-and-so, da, 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 da?" And my wife would just go, "Huh." She wouldn't engage. But before she'd be like, "Now, you shouldn't say that. That's not true." And she would try to stop it. She just decided she couldn't stop it. So my wife would just go, "Huh, interesting." And after a while, this individual would slowly stop gossiping about people around her. And my wife was in a much better mood because she didn't just get into a throwdown, gloves off fight with somebody. She just like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where it is. You have to discern: are the people going to accept the feedback, or is it going to be basically just a waste of time? I had a situation recently. We live in an area in kind of a cul-de-sac, and in one of our neighbors is. And I say this gently, I would put her under the category of mentally ill. She's severely obsessive compulsive. So she will, be sweeping her leaves at 2 a.m. Or, it's tragic. And so at a time, some of her behavior affects the other neighbors. And there was a group text that was going on of one of the neighbors seeing her outside. I think she was doing something with the leaves, or I don't know, it was something with outside, and made a snarky comment about, "There she goes again." I can't remember the details, but it was mean spirited. It was just nasty. And then another neighbor responded back, and it kind of rolling her eyes, so to speak, in the text, and then it's making a snarky comment. And it just broke my heart. It was beyond like a flippant comment. It was really intending to dishonor her. And so I prayed about it. And I thought, I really need to say something, because this is not just gossip now. This is nasty. And they invite her to the block parties and stuff. So it's just. And so I entered the text, and I said, she cannot help it. We're looking at something that involves mental illness. And one gal then texted and said, "What do you mean?" And I said, it's not worth getting to the details, but I said, when she sweeps like that, she's calming her brain down. And that's why she's doing what she's doing, and she can't help it. And then the text went silent. And one of the gals replied back, "Oh, that's interesting." But the one that was making the snarking comments stopped. And I thought, okay, well, maybe that helped. And then sure enough, a few weeks later, start up again, but not to the severity, and it stopped right away. So I think we have to discern when is it God inviting us to really speak truth in love? Because I wasn't like out to, you guys are awful. It was more of like, you don't understand. Um, and again, what does love look like? I think that has to be the driving question for all of us during the holidays. Not love in terms of codependency, not love in terms of I'll do this so then you feel good about me, but what does it look like to honor myself, but then honor the other family members and that who I'm with.
And so that has a lot to do with acceptance, it sounds like. There's a measure at which we have to, at some point, say, this is how Cousin Eddie is going to be. And so now my choice is to accept it rather than try to change him every year.
And I think there's a beauty in that acceptance. If we receive the grace to be able to accept someone as they are, we don't say that. I don't think we're both saying that flippantly, like, oh, that's kind of rolling the eyes. Oh, that's just, Uncle Eddie. Oh, here he goes again. I think it's really being able to say, Lord, give me the eyes to see Uncle Eddie as you see him, and begin to see not just the stuff that I'm very aware of in terms of all his idiosyncrasies and his annoyances, but more in terms of what's behind all that. What's in him that I fail to see when I'm looking at all the other aspects that I don't like. And I think that's when it's easier to love because you're beginning to see them in light. Like this neighbor who's mentally ill, it hit me this morning. She was out doing something with sweeping, and no, she was out going to the mailbox. And I said to Ray, it reminds me again what Jesus said, that the poor will always be with you. This poor lady is like 92. She functions like she's, in her 70s, but she's severely mentally ill, and she'll never get better. And is she annoying at times? Sure, absolutely. Does she, do things that is annoying to us? Sure. But the larger issue is she's loved by God in the midst of all of her limitations, that she will never function like the rest of us and have a normal conversation or think and problem solve normally like the rest of us. The best she can do right now is sweep her leaves and go get her mail and pick up the weeds and start all over again.
Yeah, it makes me think even of in Romans 12, if you look at the New Living Translation, there's a portion where Paul writes, don't just pretend to love others, actually love them. And that one cuts deep, right? Because what your neighbors were probably doing was in front of her pretending to love her, but behind her back saying rude things about her. For you, what you're doing is you're trying to shift, it sounds like to me, your heart and your mind, trying to transform them, as Romans 12 talks about, so that even when you're not speaking with her, your thoughts are those of love. She's made in God's image. Isn't this sad that she's going through this? I wonder why she's going through this. And it even makes me think, when you begin to make that shift as well, if it's Cousin Eddie who's driving you nuts on the holidays, if you spend a few minutes talking to him and asking real good questions, you might actually begin to find out there's good reason for his idiosyncrasies. When you find out what people grew up with, it often explains a heck of a lot. And it helps, I think it helps make compassion come much easier when you learn someone's story.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that with this woman in particular, her and her husband were refugees from Eastern Europe during World War, would that be World War II?
Yeah, would have been. Wow.
So
There you
they
go.
saw unbelievable trauma and tragedy and heartache, and who knows how much that just got set in her chemistry that she's operating against.
And see, that's enough for me to be able to extend compassion. Maybe not for everybody, but she was a refugee in World War II, ended up fleeing her country, ended up moving here. Okay, she can sweep her leaves. I've never had to go through something like that, where you find out even, like in part of my story, I found out my dad never heard his own father say, I love you, and never got a hug from his dad. that affects people. And when I can see my dad in that light, I can see how far he's come in overcoming the deficiencies that were in front of him. And so I think that becomes the challenge, right? If we really believe people are made in God's image, how can we even believe that our crazy relatives are made in God's image?
Yeah,
And how can we learn to actually love them?
Yes, and I think there's another aspect of this that has been a troubling passage for me for so many years is in the end of Matthew when some of the disciples come to Jesus and say, "Lord, didn't we cast out demons in your name? Didn't we heal the sick? Didn't we do all these things?" And he says, "Depart from me, I never knew you."
Mm-hmm.
I think that, and then he said, "Whenever you do this for the least of these, my brethren, you do this for me." And what he's really saying is where you will see me most clearly in the people that are most unlovable. And so we tend, I think, romanticize the poor of it's going to be this sweet little encounter of someone who's less fortunate and they're going to be thankful and, they'll look up to me with grateful eyes and, therein is Jesus. When in fact, I think it's not so romantic. I think that God he shows up with this lady. He's teaching this woman, this neighbor, through her mental illness, is showing the rest of the neighborhood that they need to be compassionate. It's an invitation for everyone, myself included.
And yet some people won't choose it.
No. They'd rather have the security of their cruelty and their judgment than facing their fears of what it would feel like to get close to trying to understand why this woman sweeps at 2 a.m. and is constantly picking up rocks off her driveway, and that means to move through that, to move close to her means I need to seek to understand. It also means it's going to stir up feelings with me about being afraid of mental illness for myself.
So if someone's hearing this and they're feeling convicted or renewed energy, perhaps, to whether it's with a neighbor or with a relative, have this year be different. Mm-hmm. How do you prepare? Like, what's your therapist advice for somebody who wants to do that, but they're afraid they show up and as soon as Cousin Eddie starts swearing, it's off. It's off to the races.
I think that be intentional as to what you want. Ask the Lord for that, for the grace for that. So start first with what's your intention. I think a lot of times we just rush right into the holidays and all chaos, happens, and then we're dealing with the fallout, days or weeks later. Be intentional. Like, what's the idea? Well, perhaps you'd like to celebrate Christmas Eve with your family and not be triggered by your aunt. Well, that's a great intention. So, Lord, give me this grace and the space to slow down, pray for my aunt right now before I even get into Christmas Eve. Think good and true thoughts about her. Write those down. So you've got a full body experience. Write that down. Pray through that. And now you're getting yourself ready that when your aunt that's so annoying shows up, suddenly you have the capacity. So I think we have to do a lot of self-maintenance before we even enter into the holidays. Also, I think that, and I'm sure I've said this on the podcast before, we become what we gaze at. And I think that the temptation during the holidays is to get swept up into all the shopping and the decorating and the gifts and the busyness and lose the gaze of our soul onto what the season was really about. This waiting and great expectation for the long-awaited Messiah, the Redeemer of the world that changed history forever. And so what does that mean for me as I ponder the different scriptures around Advent? Is my gaze there? Is my gaze on making sure I have all the cookies for the cookie bake and all the fudge for the, we could go on in terms of the expectations, but that moves our gaze away from what's most important. And I think that that's another part of preparing for the holidays. If we rush into the holidays and time with our families, tired, burned out, frustrated, stressed, well, we're bringing that into the room versus bringing in a presence of Christ in us because we've spent so much time with him during the holidays that when we enter into that family time, we're bringing into that his presence, his warmth, his acceptance, his peace, his hope. That is really the core of what we're to be about this season. But it starts first with us. If I don't slow down, I will create no space for Christ to do those things in me.
And yet, I think even if someone's schedule is tight, you can still do that spiritual preparation. There's so many devotionals for Advent where you don't have to spend much more than 15 minutes. And everyone's got 15 minutes, right? I mean, sure, spend more if you can, but I worry about the person who's going to say, oh, it's just too much. I can't. Nancy wants me to pray all day long for Advent, and I can't do that. No, Nancy's not saying that. You're saying prepare your heart intentionally, focusing on what it's about.
Yeah, well, and I think quite simply, you can prepare your heart even while you're decorating the Christmas tree. If there's hymns in the background and you're pondering on the words of the hymns while you're doing the Christmas tree, or when you're in the car turning on instrumental music of Christmas. Again, you're where are you turning your gaze towards? It doesn't have to be a formal, okay, I'm doing this now, and then I'm busy the rest of the day. Christ is with us all the time. He's closer than the breath that we breathe. And it's a matter of us just gently turning our gaze, whether we're washing dishes or we're cleaning the carpet or we're cleaning the garage, or it's turning our gaze and inviting his presence in with us.
Yeah, and to add a layer to that, I keep having to have the phrase "preach the gospel to yourself" come back to me because I think it's an important exercise. Because when we're preparing for Advent, and it's the idea that ultimately we need a Savior, and it should be a humbling reality if you're worried about your relatives like crazy cousin Eddie. It's a humbling reality to think that you are that crazy person to somebody else in your family. Now, most of us deny it, right? Oh, it's not me. I'm the well-adjusted one. No, someone is praying or going to therapy because they have to spend time with you, right? And
Yeah.
it should change us to go, I'm not that great. I mean, I may be the one triggering this relative who triggers me. I could be going in there and trying to be super spiritual and make everybody pray when they don't want to. Or, here comes the Jesus person back at the holidays again, making us feel bad. There's lots of reasons where we've got to be aware that we could be a major part of the problem. And it's until we accept that, I don't know that it's going to be a functional holiday.
I think that is really well said. I think that's pivotal, that the buck stops with me. And I really believe that one person, take a family of maybe 6, and they're all kind of at each other. I really think that one person who's sitting in peace and love and kindness and knows intuitively the exact time to insert a kind word or a gentle thought can change dramatically the whole room. I really believe that. And I've seen it. But the person has to be willing to be in that place of extending it, which goes to preach the gospel to yourself. If I'm filled with judgment and hostility and I can't believe she said that again, and why did she say that, and what's wrong with her, and all that, well, I'm going to keep offering that around me. But if I go first to repentance of how dare I judge that person when I've got this gaping log that keeps hanging out my eye that I can't get rid of, Lord, save me from myself.
Amen. Yeah, and I'd also add that I have, with my wife, we've come up with good systems to help each other get some space. And I know for some people it might be a sibling, but as you mentioned earlier, we all might need a break. I mean, we have limits. We're not Jesus. I mean, we can only tolerate Aunt Marge and her comments so long, as you indicated before. And so it could be as simple as just like a cue where my wife might look at me and go, oh, I forgot I need to go grab that thing at the store we talked about. And that's a predetermined cue. It's not a very good one, but for the sake of argument, let's say that's what it is. She leaves. When people start asking, I can go, oh no, it's fine. She'll be back. Like, I've got her back to cover her to get space. And that kind of teamwork, even just the look, of, oh, I can't believe it, can be enough to have you feel like you're not alone and in isolation. And that kind of prep has really helped Sarah and I.
And I think also we need to remind listeners to take time after the holidays to recoup.
Yeah.
I think that and be aware of what stirred within you that God's inviting you to heal or repent from as a result of the interactions. So I think there's a proactive aspect that we're talking about, but I think following that, there's also a place to be able to go, okay, in reflection, Lord, what could I have done differently? And what was going on in my heart, and what are you wanting to change in me? That, boy, this was an eye opener this year for Christmas, for the holidays.
Yeah, and if any of our relatives are listening to this right now, it's not you. We weren't talking about you, right? You're the perfect one, whoever you are listening.
Right.
We're all trying to be more like you.
Yes. You and I are the ones that need the work. Everybody else is okay. Right.
Yeah, it's really just self-reflection we're doing here. So, Merry Christmas, family. The Stages of the Soul podcast has been a production of the Caritas Center for Christian Formation in partnership with Stained Glass Media. Don't forget to subscribe to, rate, and review this podcast to help us spread the word. Nancy Kane is a licensed professional clinical counselor, retired professor, author, and speaker. Brian Dolan is a radio host, podcaster, and former public school teacher. Be sure to check out the Caritas Center's Spiritual Formation Program, as well as more information about this podcast at thecaritascenter.com. That's thecaritascenter.com. And last, but certainly not least, special thanks to the man, the myth, and the legend, Ray Kane, for his guidance, support, and expertise. Talk to you next time.
This is a Stained Glass Media production.